to make an informed vote this evening. Therefore, we have asked that our legal counsel be here to walk us through the specifics of the legal processes and procedures that we have to work within. I would ask that if you are here in the audience or listening from home, that you would please not just hear the information tonight, that you would actually settle in and listen. Listen to the process that we are required to follow. Listen to the information that we are able to share, and then consider how it may or may not align with what you think you already know, and the narrative that's been incorrectly established. I know that some will instantly coin this as a counter-narrative. Instead, I would contend that it's simply sharing the missing information that we've been unable to share until this evening. Steve Williams, our legal counsel from KSB School of Law, will now share some insight on the legal processes.
Thank you, Dr. Jonas. As Dr. Jonas said, my name is Steve Williams. I'm an attorney from Lincoln, Nebraska. I've represented school districts across the state this is my 27th year doing so. Our office currently represents anywhere between 100, 150 school districts throughout the state of Nebraska. In the private business world, a business would simply fire a staff member who quits coming to work or who ignores the code of conduct. It is as simple as that in the private world. But for schools, the rules really are different. There are laws that apply to teachers that don't apply to private employees. Over the time that I've represented school districts in personnel matters, I have sometimes had members of the public claim that the administration or the school board are hiding behind policy when members of the public aren't provided with the information about a personnel matter, or when the Board of Education does not move as quickly as the individual patrons may prefer. And frankly, I would love it if it would go faster, but the law prevents us from doing that. In reality, in a personnel matter, the board is required to follow laws that were put into place through the efforts of the Nebraska's Teachers Union. In simple and direct terms, there is a specific process that must be followed before a school district may terminate a teacher's employment. A few other points. The administration and the board cannot discuss or evaluate any employee's performance at a meeting unless certain things occur. One, the school has to properly advertise a meeting of the board. The evaluation of the staff member has to be listed as an agenda item. The staff member has to be notified that his performance may be discussed at that meeting, and the employee is given the opportunity to have that information discussed publicly instead of in a closed session. The necessary advertisement and notice have occurred now, and such a discussion will occur tonight. When the administration notifies a teacher in writing of the possible termination or cancellation of their employment contract, the teacher has 7 days to request a hearing. A hearing is an opportunity for both parties to relay their facts in a courtroom type setting with lawyers present. It looks just like Law and Order on TV. That's pretty much what they look like. There are many reasons why a person may not request a hearing. In this case, Mr. Garrison did not request a personnel hearing. In the event if there had been a hearing, the board has to sit as the ultimate decision maker about the proposed cancellation of the teacher's employment. The administration, the lawyer, and anyone else associated with the school cannot and does not provide any specific information about the employment matter to the board members prior to the hearing. That is so that the board is able to act in an unbiased capacity. The only information that the administration shared with the board about Mr. Garrison's situation was that an unnamed teacher was told of the possible cancellation of their employment contract. I've seen some of the social media posts about this matter, and I can tell you up until tonight, you all knew a heck of a lot more about this stuff than this board did. And I can tell you that members of the community were provided with some disinformation about this matter as well. Every person in this community has had access to more information than the board the past few weeks because the teacher is allowed to say anything he wants. The administration worked incredibly hard in this matter to ensure that it did not provide information to the board to bias it in the event of a hearing being held. This is frustrating, trust me, it's frustrating for everybody involved. However, this is the procedure that is required by law and court decisions, so the integrity of the process is maintained. In this case, as I said, Mr. Garrison did not request a hearing, so some of you may be wondering, why are we doing this? Why are we even here? Why are we having this meeting? State law says that if a hearing on the possible cancellation of an employment contract is not requested, the school board shall make a final determination. That's why we're here. The board has no choice. It has to do something. The administration has recommended that Mr. Garrison's employment be canceled. The board will now finally be provided with the information that the administration believes supports this recommendation before taking final action. And as Dr. Jonas had indicated earlier, there could have been a closed session tonight. That was up to Mr. Garrison, and he has indicated he wants his evaluation conducted in open session, so that is what will occur.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so this is the information that would have been shared in closed session, but we will be sharing it in open session this evening. This is the first time that our board has heard this information, so I'm going to turn my attention to you all. Prior to Wednesday, September 27th, Jay Garrison had expressed very little displeasure with Gothenburg Public Schools, often stating loudly to anyone who was listening that this was the best school he'd ever worked at. We had some minor situations in the past that had warranted documentation, but nothing that rose to the level of cancellation, suspension, or termination. On September 26th of this year, I sent an email to the administrative team and members of the English department regarding a draft 912 parent letter and survey. You may remember back at the September meeting, I specifically referenced that as a response to our parent feedback, we would be sending a parent survey home. This was a direct response to that. And it was in direct response to the feedback we received on the novel Ready Player One. On September 27th, Jay Garrison provided feedback by email as requested. I take no issue with the feedback he provided and actually appreciate that he took time to respond. However, I did take issue with the fact that he did respond to the admin team, but removed the rest of the English department from the email and instead copied 2 parents, who also happened to be staff members, in his response. I did not send the original email to those 2 individuals as their input was not needed as staff members. His inclusion of the parents on his response email is problematic for several reasons. First, Jay Garrison attended a meeting on October 19th, 2022, a year ago, more than a year ago, where the inclusion of Ready Player One in the curriculum was discussed with the English department and the administration after a parent had asked us to take a closer look. At that meeting, I specifically asked the group if this novel was good enough that it should not be replaced with another similar and less controversial novel. At that time, there was not a single concern voiced about the inclusion of that novel in the curriculum. In fact, the team was passionate enough about the novel that the conversation quickly transitioned into what safeguards could be put in place to make this work. An exit ticket submitted by the team from that day articulates that Mr. Garrison shared with the English group some suggestions to utilize as those safeguards, ones that he had used to teach a novel called Of Mice and Men. Those safeguards that were discussed included requiring a parent's signature, offering an alternative novel, not reading explicit language out loud, skipping the questionable section, and ensuring the course itself was not a required course. All of which are strategies by his own admission that Mr. Garrison utilized in his own classroom. Mr. Garrison's feedback was not only listened to at this meeting, but it was later implemented to improve our communication with parents. These are the same strategies you saw play out this fall. He was present, he was not outvoted, his feedback was valid and utilized, and most importantly, he did not share a single objection to the use of Ready Player One. In the September 27th email Mr. Garrison copied to parents, he objected to the inclusion of Ready Player One over, quote, true classics, unquote. He noted in his email that he felt our process was a mistake. Again, stating his opinion is fine. Sharing it in an email chain with parents was not. Mr. Garrison stated in his email, why not accommodate parents' sincere objections to any book in our canon? Again, the comment is appropriate feedback. However, including the comment with parents included in the email was not. The time to object and raise concerns was during our meeting a year prior, or even in a private meeting or email to the original group or just the administration, but not in an email to parents. Including parents on the response to a message that was not intended for them was inappropriate and circumvented my request for authentic feedback before making the survey live for parents. I take no issue with the fact that Mr. Garrison disagreed with our process, but the inclusion of the unintended audience is of grave concern. This type of behavior is unprofessional and is considered unacceptable in a professional and educational workplace. Including parents in an email response is an attempt to undermine the administration. We welcome feedback and we seek it often, more often than ever, because we use it to get better. However, there is an expectation for staff to keep in-house communications in-house. Again, this is a professional environment. On Friday, September 29th, Mr. Garrison acknowledged his behavior was a mistake and sought out Mr. Riker to apologize. Specifically, he stated, and I apologize, specifically he stated, quote, "In words that my father would use, that was a real dick move," unquote. Mr. Riker accepted his apology, noted a reprimand would be forthcoming, and the two of them shook hands and went back to work. Reprimands are utilized in many professional settings, including our school, as a means of addressing inappropriate behavior and guiding the teacher towards more acceptable conduct. The goal of a reprimand is to correct behavior, encourage better decision-making, and maintain a positive and safe learning environment within the school. This is a professional setting. Professional conduct is not only expected, it is essential. After school that same afternoon, Mr. Garrison came to find me. I'd asked him for an opportunity to visit face-to-face about our process and to answer any questions he might have. Mr. Garrison began the conversation by acknowledging his behavior was wrong. He shared that he was frustrated, but that his actions were wrong. He stated, quote, "If I were you, I would write me up," unquote. I acknowledged that Mr. Riker had shared that with me and that a reprimand would be forthcoming. I explained to him that we were not seeking feedback on a specific book because we wanted to improve our entire process as a whole, and that our overall outcome would be better because we were seeking feedback from our most important stakeholders, our parents. At the end of our conversation, I told him that if he isn't willing to share his perspective, we can't make decisions reflective of it. I asked that he please bring his professionalism to the meeting in October. I also reminded him that his views are important and that we want to hear them even if he feels that he is the minority. I reiterated that he has to be willing to share them in a professional, solution-focused manner. I specifically asked him, quote, "Are you able to sit at a table with your colleagues and share your professional thoughts in a solution-focused manner?" End quote. He assured me he could. The following Monday, October 2nd, Mr. Garrison received a written reprimand for sending an internal email to parents prior to the finalization of the letter and survey and without administrative approval. For the remainder of that week, unbeknownst to me, Mr. Garrison utilized students in his English classes to pack up and clean out his classroom, clean out closets, and fill garbage cans throughout the building with old pictures, posters, and books. The intensity of this clean out caused several neighboring teachers to close their doors due to the noise level. I would not learn this until the following week. During that same week, Mr. Garrison was observed loading carts of classroom items into his vehicle. On one very windy Wednesday, I ended up out there with a bunch of other students picking up student pictures, graduation announcements, all sorts of things that were flying all over the parking lot. On Saturday, October 7th, Mr. Garrison called Mr. Riker late that afternoon and stated that Mr. Riker should, quote, "fire or suspend him," end quote, because he was not going to sign the reprimand and would not stop communicating internal information to parents. Mr. Riker reminded Mr. Garrison that he was not required to sign the reprimand and that he would simply write a note on the document about not signing it and file it in his personnel file. This is standard practice. This is what we do in any situation that a reprimand is given. Staff members given an opportunity to write written feedback that can be attached, but as you all saw on social media, that was not an acceptable response. Mr. Garrison replied to Mr. Riker that he would, quote, "likely want to reconsider his stance on not firing him because he was not going to stop until we do," end quote. Shortly after this conversation, Mr. Garrison sent an email to a large list of students and parents. This is on a Saturday evening. Sent an email to a large list of students and parents. In that email, he disclosed embargoed ACT information. Embargoed means that it cannot be shared publicly until permission is given from the Nebraska Department of Education. It is common for ACT and NDE to release specific district data to the districts before it's released for public consumption. They do this to ensure we have access to the information as soon as possible. You've heard Mrs. Richardson mention we were looking at this data in September, but we can't share it yet. It's still embargoed. This is important because NDE has to finish all of their internal checks and balances before that information is polished and ready to go. Staff members are provided the information, but also given it in strict confidence in order to make immediate instructional decisions. As of this evening, this ACT information is still embargoed, although we are hoping that it's released soon so we can share it with all of you. This action of sending an email to students and parents with embargoed ACT information resulted in the deactivation of his school email account. In his email, he stated, after you receive this, after you receive this, I expect to be canceled at GHS, a place I have genuinely loved for the past 9 years. The reason I will no longer be able to communicate with you is because I am compelled by my conscience to be a whistleblower, end quote. He goes on to say, because I am choosing to share my story with you, I expect to be digitally silenced and possibly fired. On Monday, October 9th, Jay Garrison did not call or report to work. That was our board meeting day. On Tuesday, October 10th, Jay Garrison did not call or report to work, and I began to get concerned. Jay had failed or refused to answer any calls from the school number or my cell phone, so I decided to go to his listed home address. The person who answered the door noted that Jay had not lived there for quite some time, but thought maybe he was up at the apartments by the lake. I went up there and walked around trying to find any indication of his whereabouts. Both main doors were open, but there was nothing inside to indicate which apartment might be his, and neither of his vehicles were parked outside in the parking lot. I did have Mrs. Richardson with me that day, in case you're wondering. Thanks. When I returned to school, a quick Google search revealed 3 other numbers I could try. White pages, simple enough. Again, Mr. Garrison failed or refused to answer those numbers. The Henderson address, where we believed Mr. Garrison to live with his wife when school was not in session, was found to be a P.O. box. No phone number, no address. Further, Mr. Garrison had removed his wife as his emergency contact. Thankfully, we were able to access our old personnel file system and had a phone number for her. That call rang 4 times and then went busy. Becoming highly concerned, I decided to reach out to Mr. Garrison via the personal email he was using to email parents and students. I received a prompt response. In his email response, Mr. Garrison claimed he could not request a day off from work from school without an active school email account. As a district, we found this interesting, that he said he was unable to communicate with us despite the fact that he was able to communicate with tens if not hundreds of others through his private email. Our school procedures require employees to contact their principal directly by telephone in the case of need for emergency or short notice leave. Additionally, there's an entirely separate web-based system to otherwise request leave from work. This web-based system is not tied to his email address and has a unique username and password chosen by him. But that's beside the point. It wouldn't be used for leave in this case. It would have been a phone call to that same cell phone that he had talked on the Saturday prior. Mr. Garrison knows this to be the case, and his original email to me did not include this sentence or any reference to this at all. Only the email that went out to parents included this fallacy. He added his sentence prior to sending it out to students and parents. Please note that Mr. Garrison both called and talked to Mr. Riker on his cell phone the previous Saturday. He very clearly had the means and ability to properly call or text Mr. Riker to request leave from work on Monday, October 9th and Tuesday, October 10th. On Wednesday, October 11th, Mr. Garrison again did not call or report to work even after being contacted via email. Then later that day, he disclosed confidential student information to a large group of students and parents via email. That same day, I notified Mr. Garrison that the Board of Education would consider the immediate cancellation of his employment contract and a suspension without pay beginning October 9th. Mr. Garrison was given 7 days to send a request for a hearing on the proposed cancellation of his employment contract. Such a hearing would have allowed both sides to provide and consider evidence in the situation. No such request was made. Our administration believes these instances establish a pattern of behaviors that indicate a teacher who premeditated his mid-year exit and abandoned our students before the end of the first quarter. A motion to cancel Jay Garrison's employment contract allows us to put the needs of our students first and begin taking the restorative steps to formally hire someone into that role who will continue to educate our students at a high level. Mr. Wyatt.
Thank you. At this time, I think it's appropriate for the board to address any questions to Dr. Jonas or Attorney Steve Williams.
I guess, and maybe you addressed this, but what happens if an employee doesn't sign a written reprimand? And then do we actively have teachers that have written reprimands on file?
Great question. Sorry, Mrs. Long, thanks. Great question. If we have a staff member that does not want to sign their written reprimand, the process is pretty simple. We just write on there when we met with them, when we visited the date, so it might say like 10/9/23, conversation, refused to sign, and it goes in their file. That's the end of it. They are told they can write a written rebuttal, I guess would be the right word, for any content they feel is inaccurate, and that goes in the file with it. And then the other question you asked was, do we have any staff members that have active reprimands? And I'm gonna switch that up a little bit, because a reprimand is kind of a one and done. So you give the reprimand, you expect that the behavior is going to be corrected, and we move on. In the 2 years I've been superintendent, we've only had 2 reprimands written. So that kind of gives you some context. The other option we have as school leaders is to write an improvement plan. So when we see continued performance that's not meeting our expectations, we can create an improvement plan for a teacher that has really specific steps that helps a teacher grow and get better and become more effective. And yes, we do have some of those that are active.
My question's for Mr. Williams. Did you say that you and your firm represent about 150 schools? Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Given the reprimand process that Dr. Jones described, can you comment on how similar or dissimilar it would be to other districts and how they've handled that?
That'd be very similar. I've been involved in literally hundreds of reprimands, and same process is used throughout most districts. Most teachers just sign it, and that's it, and the problem is resolved. But if they don't, you simply just note, as Dr. Jonas said, you note that they refuse to sign, you date it, you might put the time on there, and then that goes in their file. And everything else you said about responding to a reprimand, that is legally accurate. They have the legal right to put anything in response to any document in their personnel file if they wish.
My question is regarding the board hiring and firing teachers, because I do think that's confusing. Could you clarify that a little bit more? What were you doing here tonight? I know you touched on it a little bit, but just...
Sure, absolutely. By law, the school board has to approve a written contract for any certificated employee. You don't have a choice. That's statute as well. And so you have to approve those. A teacher's contract is called continuing contract law. Their contract continues unless you give them notice, a specific written notice, by April 15th of each year. And so unless that happens, their contract just continues and rolls over. If a notice is given, ultimately either there would be a personnel hearing at which the board would make a decision on the continued employment or not. Or if they don't request a hearing, much like we have tonight, the board still has to take some action on that contract issue.
My question is in regards to the grievance policy. Mr. Garrison had been here with previous administrations. Had there been anything filed previously in the grievance policy?
Great question. I am going to read into that a little bit. Are you wondering if, sorry I can't see you, Mrs. Press. Are you wondering if there was a grievance filed on behalf of him, or if he filed a grievance?
If he filed, I mean, you mentioned that he had not really had anything happen prior to that September 26th. So was there anything documented?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to take that in 2 parts. There were several things that were documented. When I first reached out to Mr. Williams to inquire on this particular situation, I specifically said, I'm not going to give you any other information up to this point because I want to evaluate it from this one instance only. So we really have not opened up that part of the personnel file, if you will. And I don't think it's pertinent to our decision this evening. Yes, we had lots of documentation, but nothing that I think is pertinent to the decision-making process tonight. The other half of that is, was there a grievance filed? So we've spent a lot of time talking about code of conduct. I hear this a lot. And a reminder, the code of conduct, or not the code of conduct, the chain of command, my apologies. The chain of command exists to ensure that we address issues at the level that's closest to where the issue is occurring, right, with the person who has the most information. Nothing in our chain of command says if you have a problem with the first person that it just dies. That's not how that works. If you have a problem with that first person, or specifically our grievance policy states, if your issue has not been resolved to your satisfaction, you can move to the next person. So if my conflict is with that person, I simply skip them. Or if my issue is not being resolved, I skip them. So if, for example, a person had a conversation with an administrator about a particular book that they wanted to not be using, and they felt like that was not heard by administration, their next step is to bring it to me. I did not receive a grievance, okay? If a conversation like that happens with a teacher, it'll be documented. We document more than any profession I could ever imagine. Maybe not medical transcriptionists, but we document a lot. And if we have a sit-down conversation with a teacher about something that could potentially be confrontational, that's going to be documented. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was
Great, thank you.
I'm going to follow up on that, and I'm sorry if I don't get my dates straight. There was a lot of information. I'm going to go back to September of 2022. Is it you just spoke about documentation. Is it usually your habit to make notes during a meeting like that? And if so, did you? And were there witnesses that could verify the ifs and ors of the meeting?
Thanks for asking that one, Mr. Dalrymple. Yes, every Wednesday, our PLC process, they submit an exit ticket, our teachers do. On that exit ticket, they talk about if there were any teachers that were absent. They record who was present, who was absent, what they talked about, just the cliff notes. And then they submit that for the administration. Our process then is on Fridays, Mrs. Richardson brings those to our administrative team, and we talk about, are there any teams that we need to get to? Are there any conversations that we need to engage in or with? And so yes, we have an exit ticket from essentially almost every Wednesday that has occurred for the last 6 years. I think we've been a PLC district for 6 years. So yes, that is our standard process, and documentation is key. And it's not for that purpose either. I want to clarify that. This just happened to be an instance where we could go back and look at that information. But it's typically for us to be able to know which teams do we need to engage with and which teams are asking to engage with us.
I have a question for Steve. Steve, can you break down the process if there's like the public record or information request, how a district goes about working through that and like the costs associated with that?
Sure. With a public record request, obviously first you need to figure out approximately how many records are responsive to that. Once you do that, that'll give you at least some idea of what you need to do. But you need to review those for redactions. We can't release student records. We can't release personnel information other than basic directory information. Attorney-client privilege documents aren't going to be released. And so it takes a great deal of time to review those, but in hypothetically, if there are 10,000 emails and you spend 1 minute reviewing each email, and the person that's going to review that is your superintendent, that's going to add up pretty darn quickly. And so if you make a very broad request that results in 10,000 emails or whatever it might be, yes, it's going to be a very big number.
Steve, you mentioned directory information. Does that mean it's possible to get an email that would simply be like the to name and the from name and nothing else?
That is very possible. It may be that everything else has to be redacted because of student confidentiality or personnel confidentiality.
Handful of questions here. I'm anticipating some dialogue back and forth. What grades and classes does Dr. Garrison, or not Dr. Garrison, Jay Garrison teach?
Can you ask that one last? Because I have a few comments I want to add on it. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.
You bet. There's, I think, been put some data in the public domain that's embargoed, and I'm not gonna ask you to comment on that, but I've heard from the public that we had English ACT scores of a 13, and as I've taken time to go back and look at that, what I've found is the pre-ACT, which is taken when students are a sophomore, that's not the state test, but I would assume a indicator that we try to use as an assessment tool to figure out where we need to focus instruction. We had the current senior class, when they were sophomores and took the pre-ACT non-embargo data, that score was a 13. I know we don't have the ability to talk about the current senior class's actual ACT scores, but if I'm to look in the public domain, I see a dramatic increase from what was taken as a sophomore, and then how those students supposedly scored as juniors.
Yeah. Okay, so I know ACT scores have absolutely been a main focus on this narrative, and I want to make sure that everyone here understands, as you mentioned, that our ACT scores are still embargoed. But as with anything, context is important. It's critically important. An early email from Mr. Garrison actually stated our pre-ACT score for this year's seniors was a 13. Sophomores take this assessment after having freshman English, which was most recently taught by Mr. Garrison. Once we get that data back, our sophomore and junior teachers, primarily Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Beavers, use that data to guide their instruction. And as I mentioned, our ACT scores are still embargoed, but what I can share is that we saw significant improvement. You can go back to the email if you want to look for that number, but I can't share it with you. This was a direct result of the ACT preparation that they've experienced within their sophomore and junior classrooms. Can we do better? Yes. Can we increase our participation prior to freshman year, or preparation prior to freshman year? Yes. Although I would argue that there are better skills, more skills that better align with our standards at the junior high level than preparing for a test they'll take as juniors. Regardless, we can always do better. These scores tell us our test preparation at the sophomore and junior level is effective. Does that answer your question? Any others?
One of the things I understood, and it may have been in your opening comments, was communication with parents that was out of bounds. It's my understanding from the public that that communications occurred with students in addition to parents. Did that occur, and can you speak to that?
Yes, I can speak to that. Our Power School student information system is where we store parent email addresses, and we collect those for the purpose of increasing our communication with parents. I had one parent tell me, I've heard more from the school in the last 2 years than ever before. Yes, that's true. We're working on communicating more. But the downside of that, or I don't know how you would say that, Mr. Wyatt, is that those email addresses are absolutely available to anyone. In fact, what happened, what I was able to see on the backside was a list of emails and student emails that were downloaded prior to all of this happening and sent to Mr. Garrison's personal email address, as if almost he was expecting needing to have that list available to him. So yes, he has been emailing both students and parents. We are able to filter that on the district side so that it's not being disruptive to the school day, which has been very important, but the emails do continue to both parents and students.
I was looking at the timeline. So the week of October 2nd through the 6th, there is where you talk about him utilizing students to pack up and clean out his room, etc. October 7th is when he had not required to sign the reprimand. So my question is after Friday, October 6th, did he need to come back to the school to pack anything up?
No, he has not returned to the school since October 6th.
Okay, so even though those could be considered, he said, she said, without video surveillance or student interviews, we know that after Friday, October 6th, he didn't have to come back to the classroom.
That would be correct. In fact, a family member returned his key and his computer to me before the week was even finished out.
That's a great observation, Kelly. I think that speaks widely to intent and desired course of action. And also the fact that he was advised to seek legal counsel and a hearing if he wanted to retain employment here. I think those actions speak fairly loudly to me.
I also had a question. So the reprimand was written October 2nd. Did he ever meet with you regarding the reprimand after that, during that week of October 2nd through the 6th?
No, he did not. In fact, I wasn't even aware that the reprimand had been given, because that happens at the building principal level. I knew that it was forthcoming, but I wasn't aware of the date. And as that week transpired, I remember very specifically, out of context, but I was on the interstate and passed Mr. Garrison. His vehicle was full of things. It was fully loaded. And I came back to the school for the game that night, and that's where I learned that he had been packing up his room all week, and that the reprimand had been given on Monday. And so my question to Mr. Boracek at the game was, do we need to be concerned that he's not coming back on Monday? And he said, I don't know. Maybe you should go check his room for keys. And so I did. I went and checked the room. There were no keys left on the desk. The Chromebook wasn't on the desk. So I truly left Friday thinking, okay, it's fine. All of this was just, just a coincidence. So when I got the call Saturday afternoon, I was quite surprised.
Dr. Jonas, is there any repercussions to the district for him sharing that ACT information?
I guess that would be up to NDE, the Nebraska Department of Education, to determine if there will be any issues with that and what they'll do with that.
A follow-up question I have to that is, so he was emailing, which I would assume would go against Rule 27 of the Nebraska Department of Ed. So is that a violation that the district should be worried about?
That is something we will be taking into account when taking further action, yes.
It's my understanding that when a teacher wants to call in and request an leave of absence or something along those lines, they ask the principal. Is it reasonable to say you could have just called the front office and told the secretary?
Yes, that's reasonable. That's not the process or procedure, but it's absolutely reasonable. The process, to reiterate, is to call the principal.
And just so we're clear, none of the above happened. Didn't call the front office.
No, none of the above happened.
I guess just kind of switching gears a little bit, but how are the students just handling the situation, and how are we prepared to move on and beyond?
As with many times when there's a difficult situation that happens, the kids tend to be the most flexible. They're doing an incredible job. Honestly, by Tuesday, October 10th, that day after the board meeting, it was honestly business as usual in the hallways, in the classroom. Just a huge shout out to Mrs. Rickardson and Mrs. Clark, who have filled in that classroom. And also to Mrs. Beavers and Mrs. Graff, and Mrs. Baker, who have spent countless hours with our substitutes because there were no lesson plans. And so we had to build that from scratch, just trying to figure out where they were at and where they were going. So that part has been a challenge, but we've had incredible people step up to the plate to ensure that we can continue to meet the needs of kids in that classroom. So the kids are doing great, truly, they are. I've been really, really impressed with them.
A common narrative that has somewhat walked parallel, and it's not what we're here to discuss tonight, is the Ready Player One novel. But I'm just trying to put together a timeline associated with this. I know Ready Player One was discussed at our September board meeting, and then the district was in the process of taking action with the parent survey. Can you help me understand with the Jay Garrison timeline where those survey requests fell?
Yeah. So the initial request for feedback was kind of where this started, at least what we're evaluating tonight. The request for feedback, and then it was, I think, 3 days later that I had made the finalized changes to that survey, and we sent it out. I think it was that Saturday morning. I don't know what day that would have been, October 7th? Okay, so sent it out that morning, fairly early in the morning, sent it out on social media, or not social media, sent it out to our parent email list and sent a text to them and said, hey, this is coming out. So we started receiving feedback, and then all of this happened, I don't know, 12 hours later.
Yeah, I could look, but I think the day, October 7th, that was the second parent request for feedback we may have received. But immaterial, we could look it up.
The other thing that I would note, Mr. Wyatt, is that October 18th is the day that we met with the English department, and we looked through all of that parent data. And that meeting was actually on the books the very first time that I referenced tonight, the 27th or whatever. We already had subs hired for that day. So he knew that we were taking action. He knew we were getting feedback. He knew that there was going to be an opportunity to sit in a room and collaborate had he chose to continue coming to work. We met with the English department October 18th.
Were there any instances in the past that would lead you to believe that he had a tendency to react this way?
Yes, there were, Mr. Dalrymple.
Can you
Can I
elaborate?
do this? Okay. On the advice of legal counsel, I'm gonna leave it at that, yes.
Speaking of advice of legal counsel, it was your recommendation we not have a public comment period, or kind of walk us through what would be normal in a situation like this.
If there's a personnel hearing, there is no public comment at personnel hearings. And at special meetings, it's up to the board whether you want to have public comment or not, and you guys chose yes to have public comment. And so, under Nebraska law, you're required to have public comment at some meetings. The Attorney General has advised once every 3 months would be sufficient to comply with that. Many districts do it at every meeting just by default. But yeah, you guys decided tonight you did want to have public comment.
Steve, based on what you've heard here tonight, what we've heard would fall under the category of warranted action to cancel a contract?
In my opinion, legal opinion, yes.
To me, I think go ahead, Lisa.
I think one of the narratives has also been that data has been brought up, or subjects have been brought up that we as a district were not addressing. And when we look at the plan that was in place for evaluating the books, when we look at our staff who is addressing our current needs, our ACT scores, our MAP scores, anybody who has had the opportunity to come to a board meeting and listen to our staff talk about that data is not a surprise to any of us. And so I think the narrative that, these deep, dark secrets were brought out is very untrue. And I think that we all up here understand where the school is and how important it is for us to move forward. Every one of us sitting up here has kids in the district, and I want to see my kids succeed. I want to see your kids succeed. And so please understand when it comes to this data that these folks over here are doing a tremendous job.
This has weighed heavy on my heart, being from Gothenburg, and I am sorry that we're here. I wish this didn't happen. A lot of things were said tonight in public comment that I agree with. It's time to move on. It's time to give the seniors their senior year back. It's time to give all students their school year back, and to focus on supporting the staff that are here, and the teachers that are here, who choose to be here every day. I'm a big believer in the idea that adversity is one of our greatest teachers. So why I think it's time to move on. I do think we need to learn a lot from this situation, and we need to continue working on things that we're working on. Processes need to be looked at for our school, and as we all know, there's room for improvement always as we grow. I also am a big believer in you have a choice to be part of the solution or part of the problem. And I also believe in this community. That's why we moved back here. And I think as together, if we can all choose to be part of the solution, we can really continue to do great things for this school district and community. I was in the office today. My dad would say, oh, surprise. But I was going through 1970s trucking invoices, and I came across the Kaiser Homestead land deed, which I don't know why it was in that file, but it was signed in 1890. So my family's been here for over 130 years. And that's the beauty of this community, is there's a lot of farm families that have been here a long time. There's new families that have made significant impacts on our community. And we couldn't be successful if it wasn't for a strong community where we all come together. So I think it's time for us moving on and be part of the solution.
Any additional questions from the rest of the board? Dr. Jonas or Steve, any additional comments for the board?
No.
Steve, can you read the motion, please?
Yes. Motion to cancel employment contract and suspend without pay. Whereas on Monday, October 2nd, 2023, Jay Garrison received a written reprimand for sending an internal email to parents prior to finalization and without administrative approval. Whereas during the week of October 2nd, 2023, Jay Garrison utilized students to pack up and clean out his room, clean out closets, and fill garbage cans with old pictures, causing several teachers to close their doors due to the noise. Whereas during the week of October 2nd, 2023, Jay Garrison was observed loading carts of classroom items into his vehicle. Whereas on Saturday, October 7th, 2023, Jay Garrison called Principal Riker and stated that Principal Riker should fire or suspend Jay Garrison because he was not going to sign the reprimand and would not stop communicating internal information to parents. Whereas on October 7th, 2023, Principal Riker told Jay Garrison that he was not required to sign the reprimand and that he was not going to fire or suspend him, but Jay Garrison told the principal he would likely want to reconsider. Whereas on October 7th, 2023, Jay Garrison sent an email to a large list of students and parents disclosing embargoed ACT information, resulting in the deactivation of Jay Garrison's school email account. Whereas on Monday, October 9th, 2023, Jay Garrison did not call or report to work and failed and refused to answer any calls from school district personnel. Whereas on Tuesday, October 10th, 2023, Jay Garrison did not call or report to work, and the school district learned that he had not lived at the address he had on file with the school district for quite some time. Whereas Jay Garrison claimed he could not request a day off from school without an active school email account, despite the fact that 1, he was able to communicate with tens if not hundreds of others through private email, 2, school procedures require employees to contact their principal directly by telephone in the case of need for emergency or short notice leave, and 3, there's a separate web-based system to otherwise request leave from work. Whereas Jay Garrison clearly has the means and ability to properly request leave from work. Whereas on Wednesday, October 11th, 2023, Jay Garrison did not call or report to work, and later that day disclosed confidential student information to a large group of students and parents. Whereas Superintendent Allison Jonas notified Jay Garrison on October 11th, 2023, that the Board of Education would consider the immediate cancellation of his employment contract and a suspension without pay beginning October 9th, 2023. And whereas Jay Garrison did not send a request for a hearing on the proposed cancellation of his employment contract or suspension without pay within 7 days of receiving the notice. And whereas the school district has complied with all requirements of statute and policy regarding the cancellation of Jay Garrison's contract and his suspension without pay. Now therefore I move that Jay Garrison's employment contract be canceled effective immediately and that he be suspended without pay retroactive to October 9th, 2023. And the same is hereby canceled immediately, and Jay Garrison is suspended without pay retroactively to October 9th, 2023.
I would move to approve as presented. Moved by Wyatt, second by Terrell. Sorry, second by Lisa. Excuse me. Discussion. I'd just like to remind everybody that there was the opportunity for a hearing that was notified. Jay Garrison was notified. He was advised to get legal counsel. He chose not to entertain a hearing. I believe it's appropriate for us to move forward with the facts that we've been presented.
I just kind of had a comment. I want to express my gratitude for the kindness that Mr. Garrison has shown to students over the years that needed it the most. I didn't know him, but clearly he had a great impact on students. But also with that, as we move forward, I encourage everyone to focus on kindness themselves and gracefully work together to heal.
Any other discussion from the board? We'll move forward with a roll call vote. Wyatt, yes. Joudman. Fornoff. Terrell. Brass. Dalrymple.
Yes.
Motion carries. Dr. Jones.
Thanks, Mr. Wyatt. As we transition and before we adjourn, just a few comments, I promise. They're much shorter than before. If you look at our senior class that Mr. Garrison has focused so much attention on, there truly are many leaders among this class, and I don't want us all leaving here not remembering that. These very students are actually doing extraordinary things, truly. In this senior class, there are currently 12 students that have a 4.0 GPA. Mrs. Stevens actually commented on several of these, but specific to the senior class, those that have been talked about the most in this situation, of them, 3 seniors led their softball team to the state tournament for the first time in 9 years this year. 4 seniors led their cross-country team to their 2nd state championship in a row. 7 seniors led their volleyball team to a district championship and state appearance for the 3rd year in a row. 9 seniors led their football team to a state playoff game for the first time in several years. 4 seniors are FFA officers for a chapter that received Chapter of the Year. 21 seniors are currently experiencing on-the-job training through diversified occupations. Those are impressive numbers. In addition, there are numerous speech awards, music awards, and even Science Olympiad district champions that punctuate the high school experience for these particular students. And to further demonstrate a student is just more than just a number, right? We focus a lot on the ACT, and that's our job. But it's important to remember that every decision we make impacts kids. So I want to leave you with this. We have a current senior who only got a 22 on their ACT, and specifically had an English score of a 15, then a 16, and then a 21 the third time they took it. They have a 4.0 GPA, have taken 12 credits of college classes while in high school, and we have received an A in every class. This senior is currently taking calculus, anatomy and physiology, physics, and a college history class. They're a class officer, Interact Club officer, Pep Club officer, captain of their sports team, and involved in 1X, basketball, track, and FFA. This person is also one of the most compassionate, kind, and quiet leaders I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. They will no doubt make this world a better place, time and time again. They are more than an ACT score. They are a leader by every possible definition. If these successes are any indication of the way in which we educate the whole child at Gothenburg Public Schools, I would say we're doing a darn great job of preparing our students to become career and college ready, but more importantly, future leaders.
Great, thank you, Dr. Jonas. On behalf of the school board, I would like to thank the community for your engagement and involvement with what is going on here at the school. I certainly have a passion, and I know everybody sitting on this stage has a passion for education. We welcome you to be part of that process at any time. Also, a thank you to Dr. Jonas and the administrative team for your work navigating us through challenging times. And again, a big thank you to the rest of the staff, the certificated staff and the non-certificated staff. Anybody on staff has heard me say this, we've got a wonderful, wonderful building here, but that's not what makes our school. Our school is the people that show up every day to impact kids. That's who really is this school. So a big thank you to everybody that is this school, and especially to the students. I think we're all here to shoot for making tomorrow better than it is today on behalf of them. They are our future leaders. In closing, our next meeting will be October 30th at 7 p.m. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, excuse me, November 13th, 7 p.m. in the High School Media Center. With that, would entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Kyle, second by Becky. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Wyatt, yes. Jobman? Yes. Forno? Terrell? Brass? Dalrymple? We are adjourned. Thank you.